Insulin resistance is not just about diabetes or even obesity. Estimates are that about half of the US population has insulin resistance, and most people don't even know it. Today we're talking all about the signs and symptoms associated with insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a big deal because it makes weight loss much more difficult and weight gain much easier. Also increases your risk of chronic disease, and it often leads to type 2 diabetes. Insulin resistance is also associated with an increased risk of heart disease, cancer, autoimmune conditions, hormone imbalances, infertility, sexual dysfunction, and even depression and anxiety related disorders. Now, this is not a condition to be ignored or taken lightly. The good news is that insulin resistance can be prevented and even reversed. So it is not a life sentence. It is never too early or too late to take action. In today's video, I'm going to give you 10 signs of insulin resistance and what you can do if you are insulin resistant. Hey, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new here, my name is Andrea and I am a holistic nutritionist and gut health specialist. I post videos on all things metabolic health. As I said in the beginning of this video, insulin resistance is very common and should not be disregarded. Let's briefly discuss what insulin is and how resistance develops. Insulin is a hormone produced by the pancreas that is responsible for regulating blood sugar. High levels of sugar in the blood is toxic. Insulin is the gatekeeper that allows the sugar into the cells and therefore out of the blood where it can be used for energy. Once inside the cell, insulin tells the cell what to do with it. So in times of energy need, like when you're exercising or doing some kind of physical activity, the sugar is broken down, which generates ATP, which is the cell's form of energy to power all of the body's chemical reactions. If the energy is not needed immediately, the sugar is then converted to either glycogen or fat for storage. Our bodies can only store a limited supply of the glycogen, so any excess sugar is converted to fat. Blood sugar is mostly driven by carbohydrate consumption. Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose molecules, which is the sugar found in blood. Over time, in the presence of chronically high blood sugars, this leads to chronically high insulin levels. The cells kind of stop responding to the insulin in the blood because the cells are already overloaded with glucose. So this means that the gate isn't open, allowing the sugar from the blood into the cells. So the sugar just stays in the blood where it can't function for energy or be converted to storage. But remember, high sugar in the blood is toxic. The body still wants to get the sugar out of the blood, so it produces even more insulin. With or without insulin resistance, high levels of insulin or frequent insulin spikes cause problems. Insulin is known as a fat storage hormone because it's blocking the ability to release any of the stored fuels for energy use, and it's turning on conversion of food into fat storage. So this is why it's so easy to gain weight and so difficult to lose weight when you do have insulin resistance or high insulin levels. But this also makes you hungry more often. All of the energy is being stored rather than used, so your cells literally don't know that there's food energy available. So let's dive into the signs and symptoms. Number 1 is fat on the abdomen. Insulin resistance tends to cause fat accumulation around the midsection and internal organs. This is also known as visceral fat. This is the most risky type of body fat as it can really interfere with normal organ functions. Number 2 is you have increased hunger and cravings, especially for sugar and carbs. We can't be in both storage mode and burning mode at the same time. Insulin is primarily a storage hormone. So we end up converting food energy to stored fuel, and therefore we feel hungry for more energy. Number 3 is fatigue. For the same reasons as you're unable to tap into the available food for energy, which makes you hungry more often, this also leaves you feeling weak and tired because you can't access that fuel for energy. Number 4 is acne. Insulin and its related hormone, insulin-like growth factor 1, promotes higher testosterone levels and an increased sensitivity to the testosterone in the skin. This makes the skin more oily and more acne prone. Number 5 is skin tags and dark, dry skin patches, especially around the neck, the armpits, and the groin area where you have skin folds. We're halfway through the list. Are there any surprising signs and symptoms to you so far? Maybe you didn't know some of these signs and symptoms were related to insulin resistance. Moving on. Number 6, swollen ankles and/or hands. Insulin also tells the kidneys to retain water and sodium. When insulin resistance occurs, unnecessary fluid can be retained, causing swelling. Number 7, frequent urination. If your cells aren't responding to insulin properly, the blood sugar is staying high. We've already discussed that. But since this is a toxic situation, the kidneys try to do their part by eliminating the sugar in the urine. So they increase urine production to help eliminate the glucose in the urine. Number 8 is related to increased urination, and this is increased thirst. This is, of course, related to the increased urination need, so the body wants you to take in more water so that you have the water to create the urine with. So you'll feel the need to drink more water. Number 9 is hormone imbalances. If you have irregular periods, infertility, low or high testosterone, mood swings associated with hormones, all of these can be caused by insulin resistance. High insulin can cause women to produce higher levels of male hormones, which can lead to irregular periods, heavy periods, lack of periods, infertility, or even conditions like PCOS. Number 10 is elevated fasting blood sugar. This can be tested by your doctor on a routine blood panel, or you can even test it at home with a blood glucose monitor. Blood sugar after an 8 to 12 hour fast, which is usually tested in the morning around an hour after you wake up, if it's over 100 milligrams per deciliter, this is a sign of insulin resistance. You can also measure this blood sugar around meals. So if you test before you eat, then 30 minutes after you eat, and then 2 hours after the meal, by the 2 hour period, your blood sugar should have returned to the pre-meal state. If not, you will likely have insulin resistance. So there you have the 10 signs. But now, what do you do if you have insulin resistance? Or how do you prevent developing insulin resistance if you don't currently have it? Insulin resistance is primarily caused by chronically elevated insulin levels. These chronically elevated insulin levels are caused by chronically elevated blood sugar levels. Chronically high blood sugar levels are caused by consuming high carbohydrate meals, especially simple and refined carbohydrates. Eating frequently can also cause chronically high levels because some insulin is released with every meal. Regardless of what you're eating, you do get some insulin. So if there's not enough time between meals or between times of eating, there's always some level of insulin still in the blood, and it never has a chance to return to baseline. So here are my top 3 tips to reduce your insulin levels. Number 1, reduce your overall carbohydrate intake and eliminate simple or refined carbohydrates that are absorbed more quickly into the blood. Carbs in general cause the biggest spike in blood sugar and insulin as compared to protein and fat. But the more refined and simple those carbohydrates are, the faster and bigger the spike is. Complex carbohydrates, like those found in non-starchy vegetables and low-sugar fruits, are much slower to digest, therefore cause a slower increase in the blood sugar, and the body is more easily able to manage that blood sugar. Number 2, eat less often. Eating 2 to 3 times a day will create less insulin spikes than eating 6 times a day. So stop snacking and consume all of your calories and flavors during meals. Now, I say flavors because insulin can be released by the brain sensing what it believes to be sugar. So even artificial sweeteners and calorie-free drinks and snacks can still cause problems. Number 3, increase the number of hours you fast every night. Fasting is a tremendous way to help the cells heal themselves. During this time, the body survives on the stored fuel. This can repair the sensitivity to those stored fuels and allow for the glucose and insulin levels to fall. So you can do this a lot of different ways. One common method is to have your dinner a little bit earlier and then either move your breakfast the next day to later in the morning or skip it all together. You want to aim to have at least 12 to 16 hours between the last meal of one day and the first meal of the next day, at least a couple of days per week. Now you know 10 signs and symptoms of insulin resistance and 3 great ways to restore insulin sensitivity. If you have any of these symptoms and you want to reverse them, check out my free class. I'll drop a link in the description below. Regardless of how many of these symptoms you currently have, you can reverse them through great nutrition and lifestyle strategies. Without dieting or exercising your life away, you can restore your metabolic health.